Purples, this is your SPaG for week 4, day 5, and it's focusing on writing narratives. It's the story of the black hat. So, narrative's a story. You need to watch this video first. It would make sense if you paused it as you went along and sort of words to describe, so sort of making you collect it to start with. That will help you later on. Use your knowledge of similes. That's the one which is something was like this, or as. And expanded noun phrases, so your description plus your noun from lessons 1 and 2. Write a short narrative about the video in your book, and then you've got your steps to success. So all the things that we've talked about previously. Right, I'm going to quickly do a bit of a storyboard to help with your collect it. So at the start, the boy lives with his grandmother. You could describe the grandmother as quite old. You could say that the forest is quite dreary, it's quite boring. It's quite a small, ordinary cottage. So think about what type of house he lives in. It's not a mansion, it's not gigantic. You could describe the boy if you wanted to. It is worth saying that this story should be written as the boy did this, or he did it. Do not use the word I, because otherwise in this story it's going to make life much more difficult. Okay? So the boy lives with his grandmother, then he walks into the forest. Now at this point the forest is also dark. You could say it's forbidding because it's a bit scary. It's just a bit boring really. There's no life, there's no colour. He feels really quite alone. There's nothing interesting in it. He then finds a mysterious black hat. Now he doesn't know anything about the hat. So you could describe the hat in detail. Maybe he put it on, he played with it, he had adventures, he used it in his stories. He then goes to sleep at home with it on his bedside table. Overnight, he ends up with magical creatures coming out of the hat. So the first thing to do is to think of the names of the creatures that could come out. So you could talk about types of birds. You could say, well, I've got a flamingo, or eagles. He could have butterflies coming out, maybe moths, which are similar to butterflies. Maybe he could have, wonderful snakes or something coming out. All of these nouns need to have description. So you could talk about beautiful butterflies, but also think about your verbs. So for instance, I've just said that a snake could slither out. So think about a really good verb you could use. It could fly out. It could soar out of the hat. Try and think of really interesting verbs. So he loved playing with all these creatures, but he was really terrified they were going to fly away. So he put them into cages. Now you could either talk about him being cruel or talk about the cages being unkind, or they were being trapped in the cages. Then one day that animal disappeared. So you could talk about suddenly the bird flew away. Think about your sentence starter. Maybe he was surprised. The boy realised something had disappeared. So think about your fronted adverbials as well if you can. Then think about the last bit, which is he realised that the cages were cruel and that he wanted to be free, and he set them free, and in a swirl of colour, or you could describe them as much as you can. You could say a hurricane of wings. So you're trying to get across the idea that they were all suddenly rising together and going away, and they played and danced. And he smiled. The whole point is that he is really joyful towards the end. So think about how he's going to show his emotions. Maybe he smiled and laughed. Okay, so that should help with your collect it a little bit. So when you're actually describing, don't just go, oh, okay, there's a blue butterfly, and use colours. Colours are lovely, but try and think about interesting words that could mean the same thing. So for instance, rather than turquoise, you could talk about rather than blue, you could talk about turquoise, which means sort of blue-green. You could talk about them being multicoloured, rather than describing every colour in turn. You could talk about them being amazing, and there's loads and loads of different words that you could look up for the colours to help you. So the real message is, don't just use things like red or blue. Maybe Google them or use a thesaurus to find better words. So for instance, they could be ruby coloured, which is red, that's like a stone, like a diamond, or they could be blue, they could be sapphire. So think about better words you could use. The cages, you can describe the shape of them, but focus on the fact that the animals are trapped. Maybe you could say almost unable to move their wings. So sort of unable to move their wings. Right, and then you could talk about the fact that maybe they slowly became more colourless and tired or miserable. Focusing on the emotions will help you to describe it. The last bit, really go for it. Think about interesting, different words that you haven't already used. You could talk about the little boy gazing in admiration. He absolutely loves them. He's staring at them because he can't believe that they're real. You could talk about him admiring them or staring at them in wonder. Remember, this is the bit where your similes could come in, so you could say they were like jewels glittering in the forest. Try and use a real range of vocabulary. Have a go writing your story. You can do it. Good luck.